The comedian Pete Holmes has a funny bit about life and death and the universe that I am going to paraphrase to the best of my ability. Please forgive me for not being a professional comedian, and I really encourage you to check out the professionals' work. Pete Holmes says, "Some people think God created the universe, and some people think nothing created the universe. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist." Which, okay, yeah, maybe. But do you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, that it doesn't exist. So when Holmes compares nothing to God as possible sources of all creation, he says, so it's either God, something that you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and something science can't prove, or it's nothing, something you can't see, taste, touch, photograph, and something science can't prove. But if nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, I think we can all agree that's a pretty magical, amazing nothing. And then Holmes says, and if you ask the nothing people what happens when you die, they'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. And I'm like, oh? You mean you merge back with your creator? Nothing. Yes, maybe. Maybe nothing happens when you die. And I know some atheists and some humanists who find nothing to be comforting, to be the rest of realness and truth and no delusions. Our Unitarian Universalist faith is agnostic about what happens after death and before life. We don't know. Our liberal religious tradition is committed to both learn from the best wisdom of humanity today, which is the best science, and it is committed to giving space for our members to develop their own relationship with and understanding of the mysteries of the universe. Conveniently enough, right now, the best wisdom and science of the day is pretty mysterious itself. Even nothing gets pretty weird when you get down to the particle physics of it. Aaron Freeman, the physicist and author who wrote our opening reading, Eulogy from a Physicist, writes the following in his 2005 essay, My Inner Particle. Freeman writes, "A lot of us physics groupies look to quantum physics as the coolest theory. We believe the physicists who say classical ideas don't cut it when you go nuclear. We get that quantum stuff is so weird, the only way that you can convince anyone that you've really studied it is to just go around endlessly repeating, I don't know. I don't know. We accept that a rock is really a cloud composed mostly of empty space and sprinkles of tiny particles. But what exactly are we supposed to do, asks Freeman, with the knowledge that everything we know is different at the subatomic level? How should evidence of an extra 6 or 7 dimensions inform our days? Where in my head and in my worldview am I supposed to put antimatter? Well, I, Jennifer, am not a physicist. I could be considered a physics groupie, though not to the technical extent that Freeman is. I love the weird quantum stuff. I love going around endlessly saying, I don't know. Because I don't. And neither do we as a species. We don't know so much more than we know. And what we know we don't know is just one tiny piece of the totality of what we don't know. For instance, according to NASA, we know how much dark energy there is because we know how it affects the universe's expansion. But other than that, dark energy is a complete mystery. But it's an important mystery. It turns out that roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy. Dark matter makes up about 27% of the universe, and the rest, everything on Earth, everything in the universe, everything we've ever observed with all of our instruments, all normal matter, adds up to less than 5% of the universe. In fact, NASA says, maybe it shouldn't be called normal matter at all, since it is such a small fraction of the universe. The NASA article that I'm quoting goes on to explain a number of theories about dark energy, and each paragraph explaining a theory ends with the words written by NASA, so the mystery continues. We cannot measure, see, or detect dark energy, but it contributes to the universe's expansion with empty space at the edge of the universe, creating more empty space, which has more energy in it than anything that we know. Dark matter, on the other hand, can be detected because although we cannot see it, it bends light around itself. It has mass. In fact, it has quite a lot of mass. The astronomer Vera Rubin estimates that in our spiral galaxy, there is about 10 times more dark matter than quote-unquote normal matter that we can see. And dark matter's mass, its gravitational force, binds normal matter, us, together. So nothing, which doesn't actually exist, is that the nothing of empty space creating even more space at the edge of the universe? Or is it the dark matter which binds us together? Or is nothing simply the law of the conservation of energy, where after your death, all of your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that you ever affected is still here, just less organized? In 2017, a woman named Dolores Cruz lost her beloved 24-year-old son, Eric, in a car accident. After his death, Dolores cried herself to sleep every night. Eventually, she found her way to some solace through guided meditation, where she would visualize walking down a path every night to meet her son at the edge of the sea. Cruz wrote, I usually spent about 10 minutes guiding myself through a lovely pathway of trees and flowers, hills and grasses that led to a glorious beach. I created details that included a table and 2 chairs overlooking the water where I could sit with Eric, have a latte, and talk, enjoying the breeze and the scent of the ocean. Every night, Dolores would walk down the path and imagine sitting at a table with her son and talking and laughing. It brought her comfort She knew that she was using her mind to find that comfort, and she was fine with that. It helped her go to sleep laughing instead of crying. Then one night, Dolores was too tired for the whole meditation. She told Eric that she was just going to meet him at that table instead of going through the whole visualization, and she started imagining the table. But then, Dolores heard out loud, right next to her ear in the room where she was lying down, "I'm right here, Mom." And in that moment, everything changed for her. Dolores writes that it was a surreal moment, a moment of peace that cannot be described in our human words. She said, "I was enveloped and I was held by this love. It was a gift. It was a glimpse. It was a connection." Since that time, Dolores has read hundreds of other people's experiences with their lost loved ones, from being visited by special animals connected to their loved one, to mysterious messages or voices or visions, to smelling their beloved loved one, or suddenly being overcome by some new and surprising and seemingly external sense of peace. Dolores has also had the experience of being dismissed by people. People who summarily tell her that her experience was just how her brain was processing grief, or something that her mind did. In her writing, you can read some of her insistent resistance to that dismissal and how she describes the experience. She says, "I knew I was imagining the path, the table, the conversation. But that voice was different. It was not coming from my imagination, it was coming from outside of me." Mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. While different people in our faith tradition vary in our comfort with different kinds of mystery, Unitarian Universalism as a faith tradition is very comfortable with asking the big questions. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? The 5 big questions in philosophy, as they're sometimes called, also include: why are we here, and how should we live? In Unitarian Universalism, we encourage our people to explore these questions using the best wisdom and knowledge of today, as well as personal experience. We also make meaning here together in church. But in exploring those questions, there's a lot more data for a couple of them, the who are we and how should we live questions, than there is for those big questions of where did we come from and where are we going. Those 2 bookends, birth and death, those are pretty mysterious. There are places that we can find data, stories, and experiences from people like Dolores Cruz, and other types of stories from people who have had near-death experiences or mysterious stories about birth. People have a variety of experiences with this thing that is universal: birth and death. We can also look to the science of the Big Bang, to the particle physics of nothing, to the current understanding of the universe and how it works. But the physicists who know the most will tell you we don't know more than we know. In fact, what we know is just a tiny portion of reality. And mostly, we don't even know what we don't know. And yet, here I stand before you, very invested in these questions. I've invested my life in asking them together with you, in wondering about them and exploring them, because I think it matters. How does that stand in tension with my simultaneous conviction that we don't know? Theology. What we believe about the world and how it works, why we're here and how we should live, where we came from and where we're going. Theology matters because it's at the core of how we think, which is at the core of how we feel, which is at the core of how we behave. So it affects how we are, our well-being. It affects our relationships. It affects how we show up in the world and our communities. It affects all the people whose lives we touch. There are circles and circles and circles beyond us that it affects. So one of the key questions that I ask about theology, especially theology when it comes to these very big bookends with a lot of mystery embedded in them, is how does it function? What are the effects of believing this or that thing about these mysterious bookends? If I believe blank about where we came from or where we're going, then how do I think, feel, and behave? For some people, there is a great comfort in experiencing a connection with a loved one after death. For others, there is comfort and rest in believing that we return to nothing after death. And for others still, there is peace in the questions and wonder in the not knowing of it all. Sometimes not knowing can create space for curiosity. It can create space for humility and open listening and connection across difference. Not knowing can create space to learn and honor what comforts someone else. Comfort with mystery can make room for delight and surprise. A Unitarian Universalist shared this story with me about her mother's death. She and her mother were both atheist humanists and believed that nothing would happen at the end of life. When the woman's mother was dying, the woman was by her side, holding her hand. They were both curious about what would happen because even when you believe something, you don't really know until you know. So the woman was holding her mother's hand as she was dying, and she saw Mom slipping away, and she whispered, "What's happening, Mom?" She could see that her mother's eyes were far away, even though she was still alive. She was in that slow, quiet place, the in-between. And she took a minute to respond. Then she smiled and said, "Nothing to be afraid of." Nothing. Nothing which spontaneously erupts into everything, or that which is never created or destroyed, or spaciousness, becoming even more spaciousness, racing at the edges of a growing universe, or every photon that has ever bounced off your cheeks, racing off into the universe, forever changed by you, or the cardinal, or the owl that mysteriously comes visiting, or waiting until all the beloveds have gathered before going, or the voice in your ear, or the smell of you on the wind, or the memories of walking together, or the stories of you being told by your grandchildren, or the story of your life, living on in the collective story as long as storytellers live, or you gathered in the dark matter that binds us all together, you as the sun and the moon and the stars, Venus and Jupiter, Neptune and Mars. Friends, the beginning and the end are still a beautiful mystery, but they are nothing, mysterious, erupting, nothing to be afraid of. Amen.